Hello, my name is Hakon and welcome back to my channel and another little episode in my ongoing series where I talk about my project of writing a fantasy game book for the first time. And since it is my first time, I am spending a lot of this time talking about things to consider when writing a game book, discussing different aspects of it, especially to do with world building, including language, culture, history, religion, names, all those things. I've talked about narrative flow. I've talked about game mechanics and to what extent they should be included and how they can also be a distraction from the narrative. I've talked about choice and consequence, especially in how a consequence needs to follow logically from a choice. And if it doesn't, of course, your player might feel unfairly treated. I've talked about randomness and how that, in my view, should not in itself lead to failure, but give you a different path to success. All those things I've been discussing in this video series since I started writing my game book last year. And I'm still not done writing the book, of course. It's one of many projects I'm working on, but I do write a little bit every now and again, and I'm working on it, and I'm trying to figure out how to do things. But because I'm doing it in a relatively linear fashion, from starting from the beginning and then just moving along and letting the process itself inspire what happens and giving me ideas for what's going to happen in the future, it is quite a slow process, but it's quite an interesting one and one I'm learning a lot from. So it has been a while since my last video on this, and I haven't done that much since then, but I am making this video now because there were a few things that I have thought about that I'm going to talk about today. So first of all, just to recap very quickly, my game book is set in a fantasy setting where it is quite far north. There's a little village on a fjord, a relatively isolated village. They have their own language, they have their own culture, they have their own religion. And in this little village, they had more or less lost contact with their past. And exactly why that is may or may not be part of the story, but I'm not sure yet. But that is something that is a consideration I'm actually having as well. But 100 years or so ago, could be 200, there was an incident where a teenager of this village fell in the water while fishing. Of course, one of the main staples of their lives there, where of course their food source is fish. Fell in the water, was thought to have drowned, but reappeared a whole year later after having spent time in the land that is north of the fjord. This village is on the southern side, and that is a land that was taboo to visit. It was a sacred grounds. There were different stories about evil spirits and demons and things, and different reasons, which may be some kind of collective trauma that people don't remember exactly what happened, that leads them to think that you should not go into the sacred grounds. But this youngster had spent a whole year in the sacred grounds from midsummer to midsummer, survived, and came back and told stories of what they had seen there. And these things were quite fantastical. It was about, he had met some of the gods or their avatars or their animal forms, etc. He had seen the gates to the underworld. He had found holy sites and possibly abandoned cities or towns. Lots of things that they thought was quite amazing, and he brought back these things, and it reconnected the community with their past and with the religion of old as well. Because at the time of the when this youngster fell in the water, they only had one god, and that was the whale god Akami, the great whale, who every autumn would come into the fjord and bring with him the herring, because, well, That's what they might think, because obviously the whale might follow the herring into the fjord, and so it looks like the whale is herding the herring into the fjord and bringing it to the people, of course. So that makes perfect sense. So I'm sorry, I thought I heard something. No, I'm just imagining things. Okay, it must be the heat. It's very hot today. Okay, so right, so that was what happened, and they still wouldn't just go into the sacred grounds, but they still thought of them as sacred, and that there were reasons that they shouldn't just do that. But what they did was that they instated a kind of rite of passage, a ritual that all young people had to go through to commemorate what happened to this youngster 100 years ago. So all the young people they get thrown in the water at midsummer, and they have to sort of ritually die, and then they will have to go into the sacred grounds, try to come back, survive a year, come back, and hopefully with new stories about what is there. And that was the starting point of my story, and one that was inspired by the world building, because I started with the world building, I started with the language, I started with some other aspects of it before I even had thought of what the story would be about. And so the world building becomes the story in a way. So because they have to spend the whole year outside, and they're starting with summer clothes and a knife. That's all these youngsters have when they get thrown in the water. They have their knife, everyone's got a knife, and they have their summer clothes. And that means that a big part of the experience, I would say, of being a year outside, or mostly outside, in the sacred grounds would be one of survival. And to start with, I was thinking of this survival part as a much bigger part of the narrative than it is now. And the reason is that I suppose initially I had lots of ideas for survival. I was thinking, okay, so you have to get food, you have to make sure you get warm clothes, you have to practice your survival skills, you might have to make ropes, etc., etc. And then I realized, as I was working on this book, and of course getting inspired by things that I wrote in to come up with further ideas, and of course all the new ideas I had were not to do with survival, but with the more important world building aspect of it, with what do you experience in the sacred grounds? I mean, who do you meet, or what do you meet? Do you see any temples? Do you see what's the significance of that? Do you see something that isn't quite right? And what is the significance of that? And how does that play out? And all those things are far more important, I realized, than the survival bit of it. And so I decided that if I wanted to, well, of course, you could make quite a nice survival game book in itself, just that, and you can make one where you completely ignore the survival aspect and do just that. But I think that I still need to include some elements of survival, I think, because they are also significant to the other things. I'm not going to go into details about that because that would be a spoiler, actually. But there are choices you can make in your practice of survival skills, that is gathering food or gathering nettles for making cord, etc. There are aspects of the choices you make that will have a significance on the cultural thing, on the things to do with the religion, things to do with the sacredness of the grounds, of the sacred grounds, that will be relevant when. So I will have to keep some of it in because it is already sort of woven into other things that I have written and I don't want to write out. So, but I will try to remove any survival passages that aren't really necessary to drive the story forward. And so there will be less of it. There will be some pivotal things, but the main part of the narrative now will be the one that is founded on the actual cultural world building to do with the religion, etc. As well as some other events going on, which also basically, of course, are also to do with the religion and the culture, because everything happens for a reason. And if just say there might be someone else in the sacred grounds, why are they there? And that reason goes back to the culture again. So yeah, I'm not going to say more about that right now because, well, spoilers again. So so I get these ideas gradually as I move along, and which is quite makes it quite a slow process as well. But there you go. So that's the main new thing today, is that I've decided to pare down on the survival aspect of it, but only to the point that I keep in some bits that I think are quite important. So there will still be, it will still be possible for you to lose your knife, because that has some interesting consequences that I want to keep in. It will still be possible for you to gather food at least once. I mean, explicitly. At other times, it might be implicit. It might sort of say that, oh, you rest down for the night, you gather some food, you go, yeah, you've managed to catch a rabbit on your way. That's that sort of thing. So there might be some implied survival that I might sort of just write into the general narrative without you having to actually actively do things to accomplish those survival things. Right. So yeah, so I've got lots of other ideas that I'll write down as I go along. I'm not going to go into too many details of those ideas because I don't know how I'm going to weave some of them in. I don't want to give away too much of the story right now. And so yeah. Another thing I realized, of course, when I decided to remove some of the survival aspects of the book, is that editing the book in a linear document, which is what I've been doing so far, isn't ideal. So what I've been doing is a first draft I started writing on just pen and paper in a notebook, just a notebook like this, and then I transferred that to Microsoft Word. I also did the formatting and things, which is really not something one should be doing right away, but I just like how it looks on the page to have the right formatting as well. But when you are working with branching narratives, once it starts branching off and branching back on itself, it's very easy to make mistakes, especially if you're working in a linear document. If you change a paragraph a little bit and you want to change a reference, then it's more work. You have to double check everything is correct. You might easily miss something. So I decided that I was going to transfer it to Twine, which is a branching narrative authoring tool, which can also create its own interactive online game books, I think, in itself, if you publish them online. It can publish to an HTML document, which is the tool I use to map fighting fantasy books, actually, and also I decided I should use it for my game books. So I'm not going to show you the view now. So this is the game book so far. And I also just realized when I was transferring it now yesterday that you can put in tags. So I've got red tags now to show where the story ends, and I've got green tags to show paragraphs that haven't been finished yet and that still don't have their choices inserted for where they go next. Structure-wise, you can probably see a little bit about the structure now, because you have the beginning bit, and then you have a sort of a middle bit of what I've been doing here, and then there's some choke points. There's a choke point here that all branches lead to, and then there's a little bit going on here, and then everything then leads up here, which is sort of the next section of the book. So I've got another choke point going on here that all these things will lead to if you're still alive. So that is what I've been doing so far, and then I'm going to keep using the space here to add more. And it makes it so much easier to double check that all the connections are correct as well in Twine than it is when using Word. The only thing, of course, is I lose all my formatting. It's easy to put it back in later, so that's not an issue. It really is not the correct order to start with the formatting and then doing the writing. It should always be the other way around. Anyway, so yes, I'm using Twine, and it seems to be quite a good tool for the job. It is, I think, it's the best one I've found so far when it comes to mapping out a branching narrative, because you actually create links between paragraphs very easily and quickly that you can follow by a sort of playtesting mechanism as well. You press play and you can actually run through the text and the choices as you like. Right, was there anything else I wanted to tell you today? I'm not sure if there was, but if there was, I will remember later, and then I'll think, oh well, I'll just have to do that in the next video. I have a feeling there was something I was meaning to talk about in this video that I thought about last time, but now I can't remember because it has been a long time since I made a gamebook writing video, so maybe I'll remember that too for next time. I think I covered in the last episode the important things that I wanted to, so yeah. So that's the news thing, really. I'm going to pare down on the survival parts to focus on what is the main driver of the narrative, which is, again, going back to where I started, of course, in this series: world building, world building, world building. World building is what drives the narrative forward. And if you focus on the world building, then, of course, a lot of other things just fall into place. That's what I think. Right, so thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoy this series and my other videos. And yeah, you know what to do. It's YouTube. Like, share, subscribe, blah, 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 blah. Okay, bye for now.